The snow fell thick and steady that night, the kind that muffled every sound and made the world feel smaller, quieter. I stood at the top of the stone steps outside St. Alder's, one hand holding my daughter's small fingers, the other adjusting the collar of my coat against the cold. The festival had ended. Families were drifting home with lanterns and wrapped loaves, their laughter fading into the white. I had promised my mother we would come for supper. The thought of her warm kitchen, the fire already lit, the smell of stew waiting, was the only thing pulling me forward. Alira tugged at my hand. "Papa, look." I followed her gaze down the steps to the side entrance. There, half hidden in the shadow of the stone arch, sat a woman, an orc. She was curled in on herself, knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight around her middle. Her clothes were thin, too thin for this weather. A faded shawl barely covered her shoulders, and strips of cloth were wound around her feet instead of boots. She wasn't begging. She wasn't calling out. She simply sat there, watching the families pass with eyes that looked like they had already accepted they would not be invited anywhere. I felt the familiar pull to keep walking. It was cold. Alira was small. My mother would worry if we were late. But Alira had already let go of my hand. She walked straight down the steps, her small boots leaving prints in the fresh snow, and stopped right in front of the woman. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then my daughter spoke, her voice clear and unafraid in the quiet. "I think you need a hug." The orc woman lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were golden, rimmed red from the cold or from holding back tears. I couldn't tell which. She looked at Alira, the way someone might look at a bird that had landed too close, startled, unsure whether to trust the moment or brace for it to end badly. "Little one," she said, voice rough and low, "you should not come near me. Your coat will get dirty." Alira shook her head, the braids my mother had done that morning swinging against her shoulders. Hugs make people less sad. Dirt doesn't matter. Before I could reach her, before I could say anything at all, Alira stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around the woman's neck. The orc stiffened at first, shoulders rigid, hands hovering in the air as if she didn't know what to do with them. Then something in her broke. Her arms came up and closed around my daughter's back, careful, almost trembling. Her face pressed into Alira's shoulder, and even from where I stood, I could see the way her whole body shook with silent crying. I stayed frozen on the steps. I had been ready to walk past. I had already measured the distance to my mother's house, already decided the woman was someone else's problem. And here was my 4-year-old child doing the one thing I had forgotten how to do, stopping. The snow kept falling. A few people glanced our way as they passed, then looked quickly away again. I felt their eyes on me, too, the weight of what they must be thinking. But none of that mattered as much as the sight of my daughter holding a stranger who had clearly not been held in a very long time. I walked down the steps. When I reached them, the woman was already trying to pull away, wiping her face with the edge of her shawl, shoulders hunched in shame. Alira stayed close, one small hand still resting on the woman's arm. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't mean to. She just came over. I told her not to." Her voice was quiet, careful, the kind of voice people use when they expect to be told to leave. I crouched down so I was level with both of them. The cold from the stone steps bit through my trousers, but I stayed there. "My name is Cedrin," I said. "This is my daughter, Alira." The woman's eyes flicked up to mine, surprised. She looked younger than I had first thought. Maybe 26, maybe less. There were lines of exhaustion around her mouth, but her face was open in a way that made something in my chest tighten. "I didn't ask for anything," she said. "I was just sitting. I'll go." Alira looked up at me, then back at the woman. "Papa, she's cold, and she doesn't have anywhere to go." I didn't ask how my daughter knew that. Children sometimes see things adults train themselves not to notice. I took off my own coat and draped it over the woman's shoulders. It was too big for her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, but it was wool and still warm from my body. She went very still under the weight of it. "My mother always sets an extra place at the table on festival nights," I said, "even when no one is coming. Tonight that place is yours if you want it." She shook her head once, fast. "I can't. I have nothing to offer in return." "You don't need to offer anything," I answered. "Just come out of the snow." Alira reached out and took one of the woman's hands in both of hers. "Come with us. Grandmother made honey cakes." The woman looked down at my daughter's small fingers wrapped around her larger calloused ones. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for days. "Just for tonight," she whispered. Elira beamed. I stood and offered the woman my hand to help her up. She hesitated, then took it. Her grip was strong but careful, as if she was still waiting for the moment someone would pull away. We walked together through the falling snow, my daughter between us, holding both our hands, chattering about the cakes waiting at my mother's house. The woman kept her head down, the borrowed coat pulled tight around her. I didn't ask her name. I didn't ask why she had been sitting alone on the steps. Those questions could wait. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't walking through the world like a shadow moving from one duty to the next. I was walking with someone. And the cold that had lived in my chest since my wife died felt just a little like it had cracked open to let something else in. Behind us, the church bells rang the hour. Ahead, the lights of my mother's house glowed warm through the snow. The woman's steps were slow at first, then steadier. Elira swung our joined hands and hummed a tune only she knew. I didn't know what would happen after tonight. I only knew that for the first time in 2 years, I had chosen to stop instead of keep walking. And that choice had started with 4 small words spoken by my daughter in the snow. The walk to my mother's house took longer than usual, the snow had thickened, and the woman, still wearing my coat, moved carefully, as if every step cost her something. Elira kept up a steady stream of chatter between us, telling the stranger about the honey cakes, about the big fire in the kitchen, about how grandmother always let her have 2 pieces on festival nights. The woman listened without interrupting. Every now and then she would glance down at my daughter with an expression I couldn't quite name, something between wonder and pain. My mother's house stood at the end of the lane, its windows glowing gold against the white. Smoke curled from the chimney. Before I could knock, the door opened. My mother stood there in her dark wool dress, gray hair pinned back, eyes sharp as ever. She took in the 3 of us at once, me, Elira, and the tall orc woman wrapped in my coat. She didn't ask questions, she simply stepped aside. "Bring her in before the snow melts on her. The child looks half frozen too." Inside, the warmth hit like a wall, the smell of stew and fresh bread wrapped around us. My mother took one look at the woman's bare feet wrapped in dirty cloth and clicked her tongue. "Cedrin, take the little one to wash her hands. I'll see to our guest." She didn't wait for an answer. She guided the woman toward the back room where the big copper tub was already steaming. I heard her voice, low and practical. "You'll catch your death in those rags. There's hot water and soap. I'll find you something dry." Elira tugged at my sleeve. "Is she staying, Papa?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "We washed up at the basin in the kitchen." When we returned, the woman had changed. She wore a simple wool dress that had once belonged to my younger sister, dark green, a little loose on her frame, but clean and warm. Her black hair was damp and braided loosely down her back. She stood near the hearth, hands clasped in front of her, looking like she wasn't sure she was allowed to take up space. My mother placed a bowl of hot water and a cloth on the table. "Sit. Warm your hands before supper." The woman obeyed without a word. Supper was simple and plentiful. Chicken stew thick with root vegetables, barley bread still warm from the oven, slices of salted pork, and the promised honey cakes. My mother set an extra place without comment. Elira insisted the woman sit beside her. Throughout the meal, my daughter kept sliding pieces of bread and meat onto the woman's plate, as if worried she might disappear if she didn't eat enough. Conversation flowed around ordinary things. My mother talked about the apple tree in the yard losing a branch under the snow. I mentioned the forge down the road had run out of charcoal again. Elira described a drawing she had made of a horse with 5 legs because 4 wasn't enough. No one asked the woman where she had come from or why she had been sitting alone on the church steps. The silence on that subject felt deliberate, protective. I watched the woman slowly relax, her shoulders lowered. She stopped gripping the edge of the table so tightly. When Elira offered her a second honey cake, she actually smiled. Small, careful, but real. After the plates were cleared, my mother caught my eye and nodded toward the small sitting room at the back of the house. I understood. She wanted to speak with the woman alone. I took Elira upstairs to change into her nightdress and read her a story. By the time I came back down, the fire in the sitting room had burned low. My mother and the woman sat on the bench near the window. The woman's head was bowed. My mother's hand rested over hers. I stayed in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. "I lost my husband in a winter like this one," my mother was saying quietly. "The world kept turning, kept lighting its lamps and setting its tables, but I felt like I was standing outside every door. I know what that cold feels like." The woman's voice was barely above a whisper. "My mother died 2 winters ago. After that, everything came apart. I tried to hold on. I really did." My mother squeezed her hand. "You don't have to explain tonight, but you don't have to stand outside anymore either." When the woman looked up, her golden eyes were wet. She didn't speak, but she nodded once. I stepped back into the hallway before either of them noticed me. Something tight had formed in my chest. I thought of my wife, how she would have done exactly what my mother just did, how she would have been disappointed in me for almost walking past the steps tonight. The thought sat heavy. Later, after my mother had gone to bed and Elira was asleep upstairs, I found the woman standing by the front window, looking out at the snow. She'd folded my coat neatly and placed it on the bench. "I should go," she said when she heard me. "You and your family have already done more than enough." I came to stand beside her. "Do you have somewhere to go?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No." The word was simple, final. I looked at her profile in the firelight, the sharp line of her jaw, the way her hands were still clenched even now. She looked like someone who had spent a long time making herself small so the world would leave her alone. "There's a room at the back," I said. "It used to be my sister's. It has a bed and a small stove. You can stay tonight. No one will bother you." She turned to look at me. For the first time since the church steps, she met my eyes directly. "Just one night," she said softly. "I don't want to become a burden." I nodded. Just one night. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. One night would not be enough to undo whatever had left her sitting alone in the snow on a festival evening. One night would not erase the way she still flinched when someone moved too quickly near her. And one night would not quiet the strange, unfamiliar feeling that had started in my chest the moment my daughter wrapped her arms around this stranger. She looked toward the back hallway where the room waited. "Thank you." Cedrin. It was the first time she had said my name. It sounded careful on her tongue, like she was testing whether it was safe to use. I watched her walk down the short hallway. She paused at the door, glanced back once, then stepped inside and closed it gently behind her. I stood alone in the main room for a long time. The fire crackled. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Upstairs, my daughter slept. My mother slept. And in the back room, a woman whose name I still didn't know was finally out of the cold. For the first time in 2 years, the house felt like it held more than just the 3 of us in the memory of the one who was gone. It felt like it was holding the beginning of something I didn't yet have words for. I banked the fire, checked the locks, and climbed the stairs. As I passed the back room, I heard nothing from inside. No movement, no sound. She was probably already asleep or lying awake staring at the ceiling the way I sometimes did. Either way, she was warm, she was safe. And for tonight, that was enough. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was still quiet, the fire downstairs reduced to glowing embers. I dressed and went down to the kitchen to start the kettle, expecting to find the back room empty and the front door unlocked. Part of me had already prepared for that, the quiet acceptance that last night had been exactly what she said it would be. One night only. But when I passed the small hallway, the door to the back room was still closed. I stood there for a moment, listening. No sound came from inside. I told myself she was probably still asleep, that the warmth and the bed had done what they were meant to do. I went to the kitchen and began cutting bread for breakfast. I had just set the kettle on the stove when I heard the soft click of the back door. She was already dressed in the clothes my mother had given her, the green wool dress covered by my coat again. Her hair was braided tightly, and she carried nothing. No bundle, no extra cloth. She moved like someone who had practiced leaving without making noise. She froze when she saw me. "I was going to go before anyone woke," she said quietly. "I didn't want to be trouble." I set the knife down. "You're not trouble." She looked at the floor. "I don't have anywhere to pay you back, and I can't stay here forever. Your mother has already done too much." I poured hot water into 2 cups and pushed one across the table toward her. "Sit. At least drink something before you decide the whole world is waiting for you to disappear." She hesitated, then sat. Her hands wrapped around the cup, but she didn't drink. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the kettle still hissing on the stove and the faint creak of the house settling in the cold. Then she said, "My name is Marith Willowfang." It was the first time she had offered it without being asked. I nodded. "Cedrin Hollowmere, though you already knew that." A small, tired smile touched her mouth and vanished. "My mother died 2 winters ago," she said after another silence. "Lung sickness. After she was gone, I kept the room we shared above the weaving workshop. I worked there for 6 years. Good work. Steady. Then the new owner came. He didn't want orcs on his floor, said we made the customers nervous. He let the humans stay and found reasons to let the rest of us go." She turned the cup slowly between her palms. "I looked for work everywhere, markets, tanneries, even the stables. No one wanted to hire an orc who had already been let go once. The rent kept climbing, 3 months behind, then 4. One morning the landlord's men came with a cart and put everything I owned on the street. I tried to carry what I could, but after 2 days I had to leave most of it. The coat I was wearing last night was the only thing left that still kept any warmth." She stopped. Her voice had stayed steady, but her hands had tightened around the cup until the knuckles showed pale green. "I didn't sit on those church steps to beg," she said. "I just didn't know where else to go, where no one would tell me to move along." I let the words settle between us. "I could give you coin," I said finally. "Enough to rent a room for a month. Enough to buy boots and a proper cloak." Her head came up sharply. "I don't want your pity." "It wouldn't be pity. It would feel like it." I leaned back in the chair. "Then work for it." She blinked. "What?" "My warehouse needs someone who knows fabric, someone who can check quality men-torn sacks, sort the good bolts from the ones that have gone damp. The pay is fair, the work is real. If you're not good at it, I'll tell you. If you are, you keep the job." Marith stared at me like I had spoken in a language she didn't understand. "You would trust me with your goods? I would trust you to do the work you say you can do, that's all." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the first gray light was beginning to push against the snow. 3 days, she said at last. "Let me try for 3 days. If I'm not what you need, I'll leave and you won't see me again." I nodded. 3 days. She came on the morning of the 3rd day after that conversation. The warehouse sat at the edge of the river road, long and low, built of dark timber and stone. The men who worked there, mostly humans, a few half-elves, looked up when she walked in beside me. I saw the glances, the quick assessments, the way some of them straightened as if expecting trouble. I didn't explain her, I simply told the oldest of them, Taven, that she would be checking the new shipment of northern wool and mending anything that needed it. She worked without speaking much. By midday, she had already found 3 bolts that had started to mildew at the edges and moved them to a dryer rack before anyone else noticed. By afternoon, she had repaired 4 torn grain sacks with stitches, so even they looked like they had been done by machine. Taven watched her for a while, then came over to where I stood near the loading doors. "That one works like someone who's afraid of losing what little she has left," he said quietly. "She's good. Keep her if you can." Elira began appearing at the warehouse 2 or 3 times a week. My mother would send her with a basket, bread, cheese, sometimes a small jar of honey. Elira would find Mareth wherever she was working and sit on an empty crate nearby, swinging her legs and asking questions that had no end. "Do you like the color red? Can you braid hair like grandmother does? Are you still cold at night?" Mareth answered every question with the same patient attention. Once I overheard her teaching Elira how to thread a needle properly, her large hands guiding my daughter's small ones with surprising gentleness. I found myself stopping by the warehouse more often than the work required. I told myself it was to check the ledgers, to speak with Taven about the next caravan. But more often than not, I ended up near the long tables where Mareth sorted and mended, watching the way her hands moved, the way her shoulders had started to lose some of their constant tension. One evening, after the last of the workers had gone and only the 2 of us remained, she spoke without looking up from the bolt of cloth she was examining. "I used to think I had disappeared," she said, "that if I stayed small enough and quiet enough, the world would forget I was still taking up space. It was easier that way, less painful." She set the cloth down and finally met my eyes. "Your daughter saw me anyway." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. The warehouse was quiet except for the sound of wind against the roof and the distant rush of the river. Mareth folded the corner of the cloth with careful fingers. "I don't know how to repay any of this," she said. "Not the food, not the work, not the way your mother looked at me like I was allowed to exist in her kitchen. You don't have to repay it." She shook her head once, almost smiling. "You keep saying that. I don't know how to believe it yet." I watched her finish folding the cloth and set it on the correct shelf. When she turned back, there was something different in her face, still cautious, still careful, but no longer braced for the moment everything would be taken away. 3 days turned into more than 3 days, I said. She nodded. I know. Neither of us said what that meant. We simply stood there, in the dim light of the warehouse as the last of the daylight faded outside, two people who had started with one night, and were slowly, carefully, learning how to make room for something longer. The rumors started small. At first they were just whispers at the market stalls and in the back rooms of the taverns. A rich man had taken in an orc woman. He had given her work at his warehouse. Some said she had bewitched him. Others said she was using the child to keep her place. By the end of the second week, the stories had grown teeth. People I had known for years began crossing the street when they saw me. A few of the older women in the square made a point of asking after Elira's health whenever they passed my mother's house, their voices heavy with meaning. Mareth heard them. She never said how. She simply grew quieter again. The small ease she had started to show at the warehouse disappeared. She kept her head down when she worked and left as soon as the last bolt was checked. Elira still came to visit, but Mareth's answers to her questions became shorter, more careful. One afternoon she came to my small office at the back of the warehouse and placed the iron key to the main doors on my desk. I've saved enough for a room above the tannery, she said. It's small, but it's mine. I'll find other work. I looked at the key, then at her face. Because of what people are saying? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady but low. Because of Elira. She shouldn't have to hear the things they're saying about me, about us. She's just a child. I stood up. One person like you is worth more than all the tongues in this town. She turned away. You make it sound simple. You've never been the one people look at like you shouldn't exist. The words hit harder than she probably meant them to. I felt something old and sharp move in my chest, the same feeling I had carried since the night my wife's carriage went off the mountain road. I had spent 2 years walking around that feeling, pretending it wasn't there. Come with me, I said. She followed me out the back door into the small courtyard behind the warehouse. An old apple tree stood in the center, its branches bare and heavy with snow. I stopped beneath it. My wife's name was Leora, I said. She died 2 years ago on the road coming back from the northern pass. The carriage wheel broke on black ice. I was supposed to go with her that day. I stayed behind to finish a shipment. She went alone. Mareth stood very still. After the funeral, I stopped seeing people, I continued. Not just the poor or the strangers. I stopped seeing anyone who might need something from me. Because if I stopped, if I let myself feel how empty the house was, I was afraid the emptiness would swallow me. So I walked past beggars. I walked past broken carts. I walked past a woman sitting in the snow on a festival night because it was easier than remembering that I used to be the kind of man who would have stopped. I looked at her. My daughter reminded me that night. You reminded me. And I've been trying, badly, to be that man again. Mareth's golden eyes searched my face for a long time. But you did stop, she said quietly. You came back for me. The words landed somewhere deep. I had no answer for them. That same night, the trouble came. It started with smoke. One of the night watchmen smelled it first, thin and acrid, coming from the rear storage shed where we kept the older bolts and empty sacks. By the time we reached it, the fire was small but deliberate. Someone had piled dry cloth and straw against the wall and lit it. The watchman caught the man trying to slip away through the side gate. It was a drunk from the river district, someone I vaguely recognized from the taverns. When Taven and 2 of the stronger men held him, he started talking fast, trying to bargain. Someone paid me, he kept saying, just to scare the orc woman. Said she didn't belong here, said she was taking work from proper folk. I wasn't supposed to burn anything big, just enough to make her leave. Mareth had come running with the rest of us. When she heard him, her face went still in a way that frightened me more than the smoke. She stepped back from the small crowd that had gathered. "I brought this here," she said, almost to herself. "I should have left weeks ago." I turned to face everyone who was standing there, workers, the watchman, a few neighbors who had come running at the smell of smoke. "Mareth Willowfang is part of this warehouse," I said, loud enough for all of them to hear. "Anyone who touches her, anyone who tries to drive her out, answers to me. If you have a problem with that, you can find work somewhere else." No one spoke. The drunk was taken away by the town guard. The fire was put out before it could spread, but the damage was already done in a different way. Later, long after everyone had gone, I found Mareth in the long room where the best fabric was stored. She was sitting on the floor between two tall shelves, her back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. She wasn't crying loudly. The tears came silently, the way they had that first night on the church steps. I sat down beside her. For a while, I didn't touch her. I just stayed there, close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. After a long time, she spoke without lifting her head. "I keep waiting for the moment you'll decide I'm too much trouble. That your life was simpler before I sat on those steps." "It was simpler," I said. "It was also smaller." She turned her face toward me. Her eyes were red, but there was something else in them now, something raw and tired and hopeful all at once. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Any of it. Being seen, being wanted. I've spent so long making sure no one would notice me that I don't remember how to stand still when someone does." I reached out slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't pull away. "You don't have to know how," I said. "We can learn it together." She let out a shaky breath. Then very carefully she leaned forward until her forehead rested against my chest. Her hands came up and curled into the front of my shirt. I put my arms around her, holding her the way I had wanted to hold someone for 2 long years and hadn't let myself. We stayed like that on the floor of the fabric room while the warehouse settled around us. Outside, the snow started again, soft against the roof. Inside, neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say that the silence hadn't already made room for. For the first time since Leora died, I didn't feel like I was holding on to an empty space. I was holding someone who was still here, still breathing, still choosing to stay even when the world tried to push her out. And for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe I was allowed to want this. 6 months passed like snow melting into spring. Mareth no longer lived in the small back room at my mother's house. She had taken a room above the old cooper's shop near the river. Nothing grand, but it was hers, paid for with wages she earned. Every morning, she walked to the warehouse with the same steady steps, and every evening, she left with the same quiet dignity. The men who had once watched her with suspicion now nodded when she passed. Tavin had started asking her opinion on new shipments before he asked mine. Alira had stopped asking if Mareth was staying. She simply assumed she was part of our days now. Every week my mother sent word that there would be supper on the long table, and Mareth always came. She helped knead bread, showed Alira how to hem a skirt properly, and listened to my mother's stories about the old festivals without ever looking like she felt she didn't belong. The house that had felt too large after Leora died now felt exactly the right size. I began to notice the shape of my weeks by whether Mareth would be at the table. On the evenings she came, I found reasons to finish work earlier. On the evenings she didn't, the warehouse felt emptier than it should have. The first snow of the new winter fell on the same night it had fallen the year before. I asked Mareth to walk with me after the warehouse closed. She didn't question where we were going. We walked through the quiet streets until we reached the stone steps of St. Alder. The church was dark, the festival long over. Only a few lanterns burned in the windows. Snow drifted down in the same thick, soft way it had that first night. Mareth stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at the place where she had once sat. "I still dream about that night sometimes," she said. "Not the cold. The part where your daughter ran to me like it was the most natural thing in the world." I turned to face her. That night, I was ready to keep walking. Alira wasn't. She saw you when I had already decided not to. She told me something I had forgotten, that a person can still be worth stopping for even when the world says they're not. I reached into my coat and took out the small silver ring I had carried for weeks. It was simple. No stones, only a narrow band that caught the lantern light. "Mareth Willowfang," I said, "that night my daughter gave you an embrace because she thought you needed one. But the truth is, I needed to be reminded that my heart was still capable of opening. I don't want to go back to walking past what matters. I want to build something that lasts, with you and with Elira. Will you let us?" For a long moment she didn't move. Snow settled on her shoulders and in her dark hair. Then her eyes filled, and the tears that came were nothing like the ones she had cried on these same steps a year ago. "I spent so long believing I had no place left to belong," she whispered. "I don't know how to be someone's home, but I want to learn. With you." She held out her hand. I slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as though it had been waiting. From the shadow of a nearby tree, a small figure burst out and ran straight into Marith's legs. "I knew you still needed hugs," Elira announced, wrapping her arms around Marith's waist. My mother stood a few steps behind her, smiling in that quiet way she had when she approved of something completely. Marith laughed through her tears and lifted Elira up. The three of us stood there in the snow while the church bells marked the hour, and for the first time in years the sound didn't feel like it belonged to someone else's life. The wedding was held at St. Alder on a clear morning in early spring. It was not a grand affair. There were no processions or silk banners. The people who came were the ones who mattered. Tavin and the warehouse men, several children whose mothers Marith had quietly helped with mending and warm clothes over the winter, my mother in her best dark dress, and Elira carrying a small basket of early flowers she had picked herself. When the priest asked Marith if she came freely, she answered in a clear, steady voice that carried to the back of the church. "I do. Because here, for the first time, I was seen instead of pitied." Afterward, we walked back to my mother's house for a simple meal. Elira fell asleep with her head on Marith's lap before the sun had fully set. I sat beside them, watching the firelight move across the faces of the two people who had become my family. Everything had begun with 4 small words spoken by a child on a snowy night. There had been no magic in them, no grand promise, only the simple courage to stop and offer what little warmth one person could give to another. That one embrace had done what gold and status never could. It had pulled Marith out of the cold she had learned to live inside. It had pulled me out of the colder place I had built around my own heart. And it had shown my daughter that kindness does not need permission or repayment to be real. Now the house no longer echoed with absence. Now there were 3 sets of footsteps on the stairs, 3 voices at the table, and a future that felt wide enough to hold all of us. Outside, the last of the winter snow was melting. Inside, the fire burned steady and warm. Marith's hand rested in mine, the silver ring catching the light. Elira slept between us, safe. We had started with nothing more than a child's instinct to comfort a stranger. From that small beginning, we had built a home where no one would ever have to sit alone on stone steps in the snow again.